Good evening and welcome to another episode of The Music Corner. We're going to be checking out two bands that I find to be really interesting, sort of in the proggy realm. I wouldn't call them prog, but they have prog elements, which is of course why I'm drawn to them, among some other reasons. Two kind of similar bands. One, who we just heard from, is Damiera. They come onto the scene 20-ish years ago, releasing this debut album titled Music, which has parentheses around the U and the S, and it's this play on us and music, so there's some romance elements embedded within some of the tracks. It's sort of a theme. I wouldn't call it a concept album, but maybe you could. These bands are, to me, similar in a way to one of my favorites. Of course, you've heard me talk about them before on my channel. That would be The Reign of Kindo. Absolutely, definitely experimental, proggy type, progressive rock. Use of a horn section, string section, viola, violins, whole instrumental break sections in their compositions. They're very thoughtful, really, sophisticated songs when you break them down. Which reminds me, I have to do a video sometime soon, breaking down maybe a couple tunes by The Reign of Kindo, amongst other bands. But why they're similar is also because they're what I call music bands. These are bands not afraid really of their image. In fact, on the contrary, I think they just are who they are, and they're not afraid to really push the limits of music, I think. These are bands coming out, of course, for the outgrowth, let's say the roots of the trees that have grown from decades prior, of course, and we're talking about bands from as early as the early mid-60s, like the Beatles, of course. We can't not mention the Beatles as far as experimental and progressive rock being part of their movement in the music they created throughout their 7-year-long career. Now, as far as Kindo, as far as the bands we're about to discuss, it's to me an outgrowth, because they could not exist without this movement towards progressive rock. I hear elements of there's certainly elements of even Jimi Hendrix. It's in the guitar playing, at least not, no one can be Hendrix, obviously, but what's influenced from pushing the limits of, hard rock. Then you've got bands coming onto the scene in the late 60s and early 70s, like I've mentioned before, King Crimson, they're vital. ELP, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, of course, and Genesis. I hear Chicago in some of Kindo and some of the stuff. So anyhow, it's a little bit of that. Now, the other band we'll get into after we'll listen to a few other tracks from this album by Damiera. Then we'll get into a band called, and forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. Of course, I'll put everything in the video description later. But Faraquet, it's spelled Faraquet, Faraquet. They are a very interesting, I would call them progressive or experimental rock band. You hear sort of maybe some metal elements. It's not heavy metal by any means. But again, that's what makes these bands interesting to my ear, because they're doing something a little different. Another theme that is present and that you'll notice is something I've mentioned before, and I cannot stress enough, and it's because this is something that's just it's valuable to my, my listening pleasure, let's say, and I think probably some of your listening pleasure as well, when you hear two guitarists, or even just one guitarist, but in a recording, two guitars playing separate melodic lines that just blend so perfectly well, so beautifully well together, even in hard-hitting songs that are a little bit more aggressive, like we just heard from, and then we'll continue to listen to. But the next track we're going to listen to, which is the follow-up after the one we just heard from, that was Lessons. The first track is good. It's not one of my favorites, so that's just the reason I didn't want to open with that. It's called Immure. great track. But we just heard from the second one, Lessons, and now we're gonna take a listen to track number 3, and that one is called yes, it is indeed called Music. Drumming is very sophisticated as well. Placement of the snare, it's all about the snare. I could not help but let it go right into this next track, which is Via Invested, one of my favorites. We'll skip ahead to, this is my favorite. If you had to name one, there's 10 tracks off of this album. Flora Yield is my favorite, and we're gonna listen to that, but first, 2 minutes, which leads into it, which is the track called Departure. So first is Departure, leading right into Flora Yield. It's a nice little instrumental. Reminds me of something similar the Foo Fighters do on their 2007 album, Echoes, Silence, Patience, and Grace. Towards the end of the album. quite the intro. We're gonna listen to the whole thing. It's not that long. It's just shy of 4 minutes. We're gonna skip the last two, although awesome songs as well. Obsessions is really a solid track. Broken Hands, the one that was just beginning. It's probably honestly one of my least favorite. It's a decent track. It's just nothing special, in my opinion. Now, we're gonna move on to two more, because I absolutely love this band. Again, discovered them in high school, probably around the same time, shortly after, probably in the same year as I discovered the bands Circus Survive, RX Bandits, Minus the Bear, these kinds of bands. So this one is called Chromatica, and it's off of what came after Music. Now, things change, the dynamics shift, they get, I think, a new drummer. So you'll probably notice a difference, as well as in the production. They probably, I don't know if they were signed to different labels at these different times, but certainly at the recording of Quiet Mouth, Loud Hands, released in 2008, this is a shift, not really in their sound. Things tighten up a little bit so it's less out there. We're gonna listen to specific moments, however, in two particular songs, starting with Chromatica, in which they really go, a little bit more out there, as you probably noticed in the previous tracks we listened to. So with that, let's get into Chromatica, and then we'll listen to the song called Silver Tongue. I'll skip ahead after the intro. The vocals could be louder in the mix. Production qualities, it's missing a little something, but it's still decent. Okay, here we go. The song picks up here. Don't do it well, because you're always making it strong. It's probably in drop D. Okay, got a bridge. Alright, on second thought, we're probably going to listen to the whole thing. It's only 3 minutes. It's fine. I see you running. Okay, so that was Chromatica. And now let's get into Silver Tongue. Probably listen to the whole thing because it's the same exact length, just over 3 minutes. This one's my favorite. I would say next to Floor Yield, this is probably one of my favorites by them. It's a cool intro. It's almost, it reminds me of Linkin Park a little bit. With the muffled vocals. It's about to get loud. Odd time signatures. Notice the guitar work. Okay. Boom, 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 boom. Cool. So that'll close it out for us with the band Damiera now. Let us move right along and explore some of the work of the band Faraquet. Now, I come around a little bit earlier than Damiera. In fact, they have an EP, I believe, that was released in 99, even before 2000, or 98, something like that, late 90s, early 2000s. Again, I'll leave descriptions of both bands after, once we finish, do some edits. Now, Faraquet, interesting band. So they have this EP, like I said, released, it's called Anthology, which is interesting. It says 1997 to 98. So that means they really started as kind of a progressive type rock. I think of them just as experimental, which broadens the picture because they're not really prog per se. And I never want to misuse the term because it gets confusing. There are specific things that make prog. If you're looking for better videos that really depict that, then look no further than the great Andy Edwards. He's a go-to for prog, as well as I would also say Rick Beato at times. He studies Rush, he loves Genesis, he loves Yes. Then of course you have Sea of Tranquility, who also has a fair number of subscribers to his YouTube channel as well. So anyways, shout outs to those peeps. You guys are doing fantastic work. Now, Faraquet. So it's really the album that comes after their first that I'm most interested in. We'll take a listen to one of the tracks first from what they, first put together right before the year 2000, and then we'll have a listen to what follows. I think it's called The View from the Tower. That actually comes out in the year 2000. So they, they're coming out of what is like at this point the post-punk Blink-180. I can't get the words out. Blink-182 plus 44. Sum 41. Good Charlotte world. So sort of this. I'm not saying this is what they sound like. I'm just saying this is what's happening in the atmosphere surrounding. Early 2000s bands like Blink were becoming really huge. But anyhow, so Faraquet's doing their own thing. I also happen to think of these bands as what I call just hidden bands. It's not to say they're not known, but much like prog bands from the 1970s, Gentle Giant had their, I would say, small following. They certainly had a bunch of fans that absolutely adored, loved, cherished their music, went to all the shows, or at least some of the shows. But it's not like, it wasn't the sensation of the Beatles. They're not, but we're talking about lesser known bands, which is not to say anything about the quality of the music that they create. On the contrary, I would argue, because they're lesser known, they're probably not suffering under the certain pressures of becoming a bigger band. I always like to refer back to a band like Coldplay, who really for like 4 albums straight, in my opinion, had, just a string of 4 solid records that are just beautiful works, talking Viva in backwards order, Viva La Vida, X and Y, Rush of Blood to the Head, and of course Parachutes, their debut. They changed their sound. By 2010, they're off and running somewhere else, but they became almost too big for what they, I don't want to put words in their mouth, wanted to be or expected to be. They come out of the UK, they're this, very melodic sort of, I would even call them, honestly, a psychedelic rock band. I would say absolutely 100%. If you listen to, and you can check it out on my channel if you so desire, I do a cover of, it's not just one of my favorite Coldplay songs. It's, if I did a top 20 favorite songs of all time, it's on the list. But I do one of God Put a Smile on Your Face. Oh my God, this song is haunting. It's melodic. It's thoughtful. Everything is, it's a beautifully, perfectly written song. I have nothing, what can you say bad about A Rush of Blood to the Head? it is a perfect album. Anyways, I could go down that road and, you know, we take a detour for a number of hours. Of course, we're not going to do that. We're going back into prog rock. Not prog. Let's take, by way of prog in the 1970s, we're flipping backwards from Coldplay in the early 2000s and through the influences of prog, but not exactly prog rock. We have an early 2000s band called Faraquet. And so again, they're surrounded in this atmosphere of the post-punk stuff, of again bands such as Blink-182, Sum 41, even Green Day, who had even been around prior to Faraquet. But with their album Dookie in the mid-90s, late 90s, and early 2000s, they're, you know, making a bigger name for themselves. So without further ado, let's take a listen now to one of their tracks off of their first release. And so this one is going to be called, let's see, which one should I choose? I guess Yo-Yo or Parakeet? Let's start with Parakeet, and if that's not the one I was thinking of, it's been so long, I have to admit, I have not listened to, I've listened to Damiera in the last year or so, but I've not listened to Faraquet in a while. So let's take a listen to Parakeet. If that's not what I'm looking for, we're going to listen to a song called Yo-Yo. And in fact, why not, like, listen to both? You'll hear the poor production quality. But it captures like most of the essence of what they're going for in their sound, I think. You know, you can hear Gentle Giant, you can hear Yes, there's atonal stuff. Back to like a major. A lot of diminished or augmented type of chords going on. Jazz, right? That there's that all influential embedded within. Alright, let's move on. As good as this track is, we'll listen to Yo-Yo now. Excuse me. There's no real like beginning or ending to these songs. It's just they kind of just start, you know, like they're jamming. I'll skip ahead. It's just phenomenal drumming also. Much like Damiera's drummer. To tracks that I'm a little bit more interested in. Those were instrumentals, solid songs. Now let's get into The View from This Tower. This was their release from the year 2000, and it's got a few of my favorites. We'll start with the opening tune called Cut Self Knot. Kind of bizarre. The production's a bit better on this one. there. Now I'll take a listen to probably a majority, just because this is one of my absolute favorites of theirs. Second track off of this album, and it's called Carefully Planned. There is a very percussive element to this track that you'll hear what I mean coming up in just a moment. Probably my favorite part. Here I'll skip ahead. Things change. Okay. There we go. Very abrupt ending there. So now we'll listen to just one more and close it out. This one is a title track off the album called The View from This Tower. And I'm just gonna leave it there, so I'll probably disappear in a minute. But thanks so much for watching as always. And yeah, I'll come up with some hopefully more interesting stuff to do on upcoming videos. If you like what I'm doing here, obviously goes without saying, leave a comment. I'm really interested to hear your feedback. I'm interested to hear as far as this dialogue goes, if insofar as it is a dialogue. I'd love to hear from you about your thoughts on these bands. Who are your favorite bands in this genre, you know, experimental, instrumental, that sort of thing. Thanks so much, and we're gonna leave it with this track, and yeah, I will see you very soon. It's 6 minutes, so I'll skip ahead, but you'll get the gist of it.